Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try and race through my relatively short deck quickly so that we can actually get to questions and answers and have a bit of a conversation, because things are changing very quickly and a number of people in this audience know quite a lot about it. But I wanted to frame the discussion a little bit. What I'm actually going to talk about is identity at the heart of the mobile ecosystem. This is the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. We have a wide range of stakeholders in this organization, which many of you will know I chaired for many, many years, and therefore I wanted to embed this in the interests of the mobile ecosystem, which, frankly, in my view, it comprises almost everybody. So let's start by talking about identity. There are two aspects to identity. In most respects, identity, digital identity in particular, is nothing more than a collection of facts about a person. Your name, your date of birth, where you were born, what your social security or national identity number is, in some cases, what your risk score in a credit rating is. And you can imagine, therefore, conventional approaches to identity as being about building a file. Some of you will remember these. Building a file, a buff folder, full of facts. Each one of those pieces of paper is a piece of information about you, which you or people that you work with have reason to trust. And this is fine as far as it goes, except that trust doesn't reside in buff folders and facts. Trust resides in people. Ultimately, trust, which is about predictability of behavior, doesn't reside with folders of facts. It resides with what goes on between people's ears. And therefore, there is a fundamental necessity at some point to bind that folder of facts to a physical human being who is in fact the root of trust. So my point is, as we talk about digital identity and identity in the world of the mobile ecosystem, we have to simultaneously think about how facts are accumulated, stored and transferred, and how trust in the individual to whom those facts relate can be transferred reliably. One without the other is no use at all, which sounds obvious, but actually is in some ways highly contentious. Let me step back and say, why does identity matter to the mobile ecosystem at all? A lot of things rest on trust in personal identity, and when that trust is ruptured, then things go wrong. So this is about bad consequences. Let's just talk through them very quickly. Some of you will be familiar with many of them. Payments. You have to ensure that when payments are being made, they're being made by the right person, and that nobody has gained access to your payment ability and is starting to make payments on your account, which could lead to huge financial losses and potentially, and in many cases actually, financial ruin for the person. Cybersecurity. In the last week or two, we've had, I think, 3 UK retailers whose business operations were massively disrupted because attackers were able to impersonate legitimate employees, effectively steal their identities and get access, therefore, to their systems, in some cases privileged systems, and wreak mayhem through it. These were phishing attacks by telephone calls purporting to be from the IT help desk. The employee was incentivized to give up their MFA one-time passcode. Boom, identity fraud, massive damage. The personal brand, many of us will know about in occasions in which spoof accounts have been set up in our name, in which people have impersonated us and started to do some quite bad things in social media or by email. There are 2 or 3 accounts that are imitating me, over which I have no control. And I'm waiting for the day when they start to cause real problem because my personal brand has been damaged or impacted. Your financial reputation. When somebody steals your identity, they can start to engage in massive fraud, which will lead to frequently does lead to unpaid debts, which destroys your credit rating, which means that your financial reputation is gone and your life is ruined. Trust in communications. There are now a number of cases in the wild attested. The famous one was the Arup case, in which a CFO for Arup in Hong Kong was asked to make massive payments. He was rightfully suspicious, so he set up a Zoom or a Teams call with his board 6 people on that call. They listened to him, they signed off and authorized him to make that payment. He paid out $25 million. Every single one of those participants was a deepfake fraudster. More recently, know before, a cybersecurity company in the US did a remote interview with a coder, recruited them, sent them their laptop, and it was only when that laptop started to engage in malicious penetration attacks did they discover that the person they thought they'd been interviewing wasn't the person they thought they'd been interviewing. They were a member of the North Korean Secret Service. So trust in communications and understanding that you're talking to who you think you're talking to is now becoming a sovereign issue for organizations. Criminal accountability. This is one of the topics upon which I feel most strongly. Every week we hear about people who have had their life savings defrauded from them, and the money went to a destination account and then hopped off somewhere else. Somebody was managing that destination account. Somebody was a receiver of stolen goods, effectively. Where is in a well-functioning society, you would have criminal accountability for that kind of behavior. Impersonation means that when they go looking for the controller and owner of that account, it turns out to be a synthetic identity or a victim of identity fraud, and thereby, by obscuring and hiding their personal identity, the perpetrators of these criminal acts were able to avoid criminal accountability, and criminal accountability is what keeps stability in a society. So that's a really very serious issue. Border security. There are issues now to do. Everybody is trying to make borders more fluid, faster to go through, fewer queues, less stress, but at the same time enhancing an understanding of who is going in and who is going out. And this is a rapidly changing environment. The Border Force in the UK, Customs and Border Protection in the US, both of whom we're working with, are instituting radical new techniques based upon an enhanced understanding of personal identity. Finally, asset security. When you rent a car, or as I did a little while ago, a crane, you are taking possession of a very valuable item. If there is no trust in personal identity, or if that personal identity turns out to be untrustworthy, boom, that asset disappears with no accountability. I'm sorry to take you through this, but it's easy to regard personal identity and trust in personal identity as being a slightly academic topic, a slightly geeky thing. It's a feature of a mainstream service. But the answer is, if you don't get it right, real harms take place to individuals, to organizations, and to societies. So how does this problem of asserting trust in personal identities, trust in digital identities, how is that moving forward? Well, for a long time, it hasn't moved forward. For a long time, there have been many attempts, technical attempts, political attempts, to solve it on a large scale, to equip people, to equip citizens with the means to assert their identity in such a way that organizations and governments are kept safe. And none of it has really worked very well, except in smaller countries. In the meantime, there was also a movement which I would say was originally almost ideologically driven towards something called self-sovereign identity. And for a long time, self-sovereign identity had the peace and quiet to develop its technical infrastructure unburdened by any commercial implications. Well, it turns out that they did a very good job, and that in fact the ideological underpinnings for self-sovereign identity were not the key drivers for making it happen. There were lots of other good reasons for it. We don't call it self-sovereign identity anymore. We call it decentralized identity. And it's a radical change in the whole way that identity is structured. No longer do you have a central organization building and running a filing cabinet. You remember that? You remember that picture at the beginning, that file? Identity, up until now, has been based upon organizations building and running filing cabinets. The problem with filing cabinets, as those of you who've ever had occasion to run them, is they're quite expensive. They take quite a lot of effort to maintain, and they don't scale very well. In decentralized identity, the folder is in the pocket, or in the jacket, or what? The folder is with the individual. Each individual is carrying their own folder around with them. That is a massive structural change, and I'll talk a little bit about the implications of that in a second. For a long time, it's been theoretical, but the important thing is this is moving now. Change is happening. This afternoon, there will be a discussion at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology about the newly proposed introduction of a decentralized identity wallet called the gov.uk wallet into the United Kingdom. A huge change, both in the posture of the British government towards identity and in the technological implications of it. Last week I was in Berlin at the European Identity Conference, where there was a lot of discussion about the route to implementation of the EU digital identity wallet, which must be introduced to all citizens by law by the end of next year. Every European citizen, by law, European states must provide citizens with a European decentralized digital identity wallet populated by some basic information called a PID, personal identity data, by the end of next year. So that's happening. In the United States, we're starting to see this motion. In some states, they're being issued in the form of so-called mobile driving licenses. The most ambitious program has been one that we've worked with California on. California issues its driving license. California DMV issues its driving license in the form of a true W3C verifiable credential into a California wallet. It's a leader there, but other states are looking at how decentralized identity powered by mobile driving licenses will relate. And this is obviously partly driven by the final introduction on May 7th of the Real ID Act, which meant that the driving license is now formally an identity document in the United States. We see countries like Singapore, which has a spectacularly successful digital identity scheme called SingPass, based upon a centralized system, so they have a big filing cabinet. They are actively exploring what the future of that looks like as they move towards decentralized identity. And on a travel, you remember I talked about borders on a travel side. For quite a number of years, IATA, working with a number of vendors, has been promoting One ID, which is a decentralized identity, which would enable you to travel, cross borders, travel through airports, incorporate ticketing. It would just make life so much simpler, based again on, and this is now recently become the subject of new discussion. So there is the message of this slide is this is not theoretical strategy stuff. Stuff is happening which will influence all of your businesses within the next 2 to 3 years. I want to talk for a minute about the structural implications to your businesses and to the industry of what's going on. Let's start with where we've been in terms of KYC, because KYC, know your customer, the assembly of that file is where it all starts and where, in some ways, some of the greatest disruption will be. So the historic model that many of you will operate is that the user turns up and says, "Hello, I'm Andrew Budd." And the service provider then goes to a number of sources of information. Maybe they read the driving license, they take a bit of selfie, they look at SPS and SPS files, they do some lookups, they look at this, they look at that, and they build that file. They build that folder that you saw previously, and they store it in the service provider's filing cabinet. That's the model ubiquitously today, and the service providers often use specialist companies, of which there are quite a number, who do a very competent job of doing this. Now, there are a number of ways in which this model is going to be disrupted by the arrival of decentralized identity. The most radical is that the service provider simply stops worrying about identity altogether, that they rely 100% on the government wallet. So every time the user turns up, the service provider says, "Oh, hello, you claim to be Andrew Budd." And they'll ask the government wallet, which is, remember, in the hands of the user, on their phone, on their laptop, in the cloud somewhere, but under the control of the user. The service provider will ask the user's government wallet, "Is this person who they claim to be? Who is this person? Can you corroborate this? Can you give me some information about them?" And for that particular transaction, the government wallet will give them the information they need, and the service provider will go, "I have the information from the wallet that I need. I'm good to go," and at the end of it, they chuck away virtually everything. They chuck away all the identity information. So there is no filing cabinet, there is no folder, the service provider doesn't have anything like that. It's all reliant upon the government wallet. And this is a model which I think it was hoped would prevail through the development of the EU digital identity wallet. But the world's not quite that simple. What I think is going to happen is that we're going to see service providers who use the government wallet as a source of information, as a source of thick textured certificate paper to put in the file. So the service providers are going to carry on doing things the way they've always done it. They're going to have that file. They're going to keep records of all of their customers. They're going to carry on doing things the way they've always done it. But instead of going through the KYC process, they're going to go to the government wallet, which is, remember, in the hands of the user, easily accessible, and get the information out, take a certificate from the government wallet and put it into their file, which they then carry on doing business as usual. The principal implication for this is that the service providers don't have to change their businesses too much, but it means that there'll probably be less business for the traditional existing KYC providers, because what previously was coming from them is now going to come from the government wallet instead. This does not necessarily please everybody in the ecosystem. Another model that I think is going to, this is going to be heavily discussed this afternoon, for example, is what is in Sweden called identity switching. So service providers are going to go, we live in a world of decentralized identity. The world of filing cabinets and buff folders is over. We are going to supply our own wallet, which has got its own information requirements. It's got its own sets of certificates stored in it that are particular to whatever we're doing. So we're going to issue a wallet to the user, but in order to populate this wallet, we're going to pop over to the government wallet and get it and pull all the information that the government wallet has into our wallet. And so it'll get all that basic PID information, the personal identity information, from the government wallet, but it'll enrich it with a number of other facts that the government wallet either does not have or is not permitted to have. There's a big debate, a really big debate going on at the moment, as to how much information and what sources of information are going to be allowed into the government wallet. That's something that I think is going to be discussed this afternoon in the UK. To what extent is the gov.uk wallet there on the right going to have the capacity to compete with and replace the service provider wallet, so that effectively people are operating like that? This is a number of actors in the identity industry are scared to death of this, because it effectively means the government has replaced many private operators with the single source provision of information, or whether that's going to be permitted or not. These are extremely contended topics. They affect the business models of many large companies, and there are still many unanswered questions, because actually what the business models underlying all these things are is extremely unclear. One of the small problems of the European Identity Wallet is that it doesn't actually provide any support whatsoever for revenue flows. So underlying these pictures is the fact that the service provider oftentimes may be providing information to a relying party, or they may be a relying party themselves. The issue of certificates, the issue of information, the person who fills this wallet, the other sources of information into the service provider wallet need to get paid. And how are they going to get paid? There is no infrastructure, and in some cases the provision of government data to third parties, the Europeans say it has to be for free. All of your blood will chill when you hear that. How do you build a business model based on free? So there are these models. What is the role of the government wallet? What will be the space for the service provider? And what will be the revenue model for the service provider? Now, that's not all. There's another bound up in this is the question of securing digital identity. And this isn't talked about all that much, and it's becoming a huge problem. There's something called level of assurance, LOA, which is how much confidence, how high was the quality of the information used when the wallet was populated. I've got that buff folder with facts in it. How much do I trust? How much does a third party trust all the information that went into that folder? After all, armed with a typewriter, you remember typewriter? And some thick card, I too can type a set of facts about Andrew Budd and put it in that folder. how much quality, how much assurance is there that the information in a person's folder is real and not rubbish? And that's measured by something called level of assurance. And when the wallet turns up, when the user turns up, they present themselves, and there is a rather skinny protocol transaction that takes place between the person who has to trust this user and the wallet. The relying party says, who are you? And the wallet says, I'm Andrew Bud, honest. Why does the relying party trust this? How does the relying party know that the wallet is actually in the hands of the user, under the control of the user now or not? Because if the level of authentication is weak, then this assertion, hi, I'm Andrew Budd, is as meaningless as, hi, I'm the IT help desk calling you up. The effect of decentralized identity is that level of assurance and level of authentication are in the wallet, and the person who has to trust it is on the receiving end of it. This is very important. And at the moment, this is not being discussed very much. There was already a problem arising because the basic level of assurance, the basic content of personal identity data doesn't include, issued by governments into the EU digital identity wallet, doesn't have to include a photograph. So the level of assurance is fine, except that it doesn't include a photograph. However, for many banks, relying on this information requires a photograph, because for their KYC, they have to have a photograph. They have to have it. So they are being asked, in fact, they're being told by law that they have to rely upon information whose level of assurance is not high enough. So there's a question which is being worked on now as to how information flows from the source of information who created that piece of paper and the recipient who receives that certificate. And I keep using this concept of the folder, and I keep using this concept of the certificate because fundamentally none of this stuff is all that complicated. There are some detailed technical issues in there. But how this stuff is assured and how it flows is still very much up in the air. Now, the role of face biometrics in all of this is very hotly contended. For something that is moving so fast, it's kind of interesting that there are so many issues. Why are face biometrics a factor in all of this? Well, the first thing is there's an authenticating factor. You cannot lose or steal or share a face. At least, and this is one of my gorier metaphors, not without a scalpel and a lot of blood. You can copy it, but you can't lose it, you can't steal it, and you can't share it. It's a public credential which is always available. Everyone has a face, and it's always easy, and it's very usable because every personal device has a front-facing camera. So it's a brilliant security credential. And it also is the way that for decades, people have bound photo ID to people. The thing that says that your photograph or your driving license belong to you is, let me think, your face. So it's already the basis for trust in the systems. But there was an issue as to how you trust. For a long time, the industry has been under the misapprehension that the real problem, the real issue was, sorry, these have got mixed up. This should be right person, that should be real person. Sorry, that's a mistake on this slide. That this was the right person and not an imposter. Face matching, biometric matching, very interesting. Deep learning-based face recognition, the challenges of face recognition. It is a secondary issue. Neither the technology has been hundreds of thousands of times better than necessary for quite some years, and nobody attacks these systems by trying to present themselves as somebody else anyway. So the key to face verification is not the biometrics. Let me be clear about that. It's not the biometrics. The key to it is figuring out, is it a real person or is it an artifact? As I said, a face can't be stolen, but it can be copied. Is this a physical copy? Is it a photograph? Is it an image on a screen? Is it a mask like that thing, which, by the way, is real and my wife would not have in the house? Is it an artifact that has been put in front of the device? Is it, in other words, something that is being presented to the phone, to the device? Is it a presentation attack? That's what it's called. For a long time, this has been the focus of all attention because that was the primary means of attack. And because there's quite a lot of fun in it. You know, everyone can have fun buying beautiful masks from an artist in Japan, $10,000 a time. I can give you his name. Fantastic works of art. not a very scalable attack, and very easy to test as well. So test laboratories like this because you can build up big libraries of plastic and rubber and all sorts of masks and photographs and these other things. Lots of fun to be had there. But even that, frankly, and that was the principal threat, but it isn't anymore. It's actually largely, it's very secondary. The real attacks are the injection attacks. With the development of deepfake technology, it is now zero cost or trivial to create moving, speaking imagery of anybody. Arup found that. And what you do is you inject that directly into the data stream, no cameras involved in this, which completely eliminates all the cues, all the camera to object cues that would normally be produced by a presentation attack. And they're incredibly scalable. We saw a 780% growth in injection attacks using face swaps. Last year, we saw something like a 300% growth in native virtual cam injection. This is the attack vector, and it's really important for the future of digital identity that it be addressed seriously. A number of countries in Europe take the view that it can't be addressed, and therefore they're hoping that digital identities will be set up, should only be set up by means of an in-person presentation. But that is too expensive and doesn't scale for many other countries. So the whole digital identity ecosystem will inevitably hinge around technology's ability to detect injection attacks created by deepfakes. That will become the root of trust of the entire identity ecosystem. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go into the details now, it is a problem that can be solved, but it's a problem that has to be taken seriously, which in most cases, and in most cases, it isn't, because most organizations do not yet understand the gravity and scale of the threat to digital identity that is created by digital injection attacks. Why do I say all this? I'm going to dwell on this. When I talk to you about this stuff, you say, how the hell does he know what he's talking about? And the answer is, because we work at scale, millions for all these organizations for whom identity theft is not a source of humor at all. And therefore, they are subject to attacks on a vast scale, and their potential financial losses are enormous. So, just to wrap up this part, I want to make sure that you understand that the world is now moving, and it's moving quickly, to decentralized identity and attributes. That will completely transform everything about how data about the individual flows around your ecosystems. That the question of level assurance and level authentication you will find will become critical, and you will need to find answers to that. As I said before, trust in the individual will rely upon trust in the individual, not trust in the folder, trust in the individual. Trust in the individual relies upon people, it relies upon biometrics, and biometrics relies completely upon liveness. And so that is why I've dedicated 12 years of my and my team's life to making sure that liveness can be trusted as the root of identity. Thank you very much.
We've got time for one question for Andrew, if we have one. Yep, at the back.
Just wait, can you wait for the mic?
Hi, thanks, Andrew. I'm Gautam Hazari from SecurID XConnect. You touched upon it. You hinted on the, let's say, commercialization issue on the decentralized identity thing, right? So just zooming into that, and also we don't want to kind of, create a decentralized identity ecosystem, but still it's centralized in some form, right? That will not help, because then we'll go back to the same. So what do I mean by that is, in the, let's say, in the current time as well, right? There are identity providers which doesn't exist in the decentralized world, right? And identity providers are value creators. They're providing value, and of course there is a value consumer, which are the service provider relying parties, right? So in that case, the commercialization becomes obvious and easy, right? So the value providers need to be compensated, need to be incentivized, otherwise it's not sustainable, right? The value consumers are the relying parties, they will pay.
I'm conscious of time. What you're saying is, in this new decentralized model, there is no mechanism whereby the value receivers, the relying parties, can transmit that value to the value creators. In this new model, the values the certificates because of the elimination of the IDP. That is absolutely the central problem that we've got here.
Yeah, but can't that be solved? Because all you need to do is just identify the values provided.
No, the reason that makes this difficult to solve is that it is a fundamental tenet of decentralized identity that there should be informational firewalls. That it's called non-trackability, which means that the certificate providers, and in fact nobody, should be able to track or influence the activity of the individual user throughout the system. So the identity provider, the certificate provider, and many of you here will be certificate providers, this is probably why I guess we're asking the question, cannot be allowed to know what the user is using their certificates for. The certificate providers cannot be allowed to see the usage by the consumer of those credentials in the relying party. And it's very difficult to build billing systems in which there are these information cutouts. Why should this not happen? There are two reasons. One is to do with privacy. There's a lot of discussion about privacy. I don't discount that. Privacy is very important. But there's another reason, which is that digital identity is going to be becomes a critical national infrastructure, and a decentralized system which has non-trackability is much, much more robust and resilient to cyber attack and tampering than a system in which there is end-to-end visibility.
Can I just chime in on that? There is the idea of transmitting revenues up the chain is something that is now front and foremost from the European digital identity wallet world, and there's going to be a number of meetings and conferences over the next few months to decide the best way forward. There are a number of ways that it can be resolved whilst maintaining the importance of anonymity of the transaction. However, there is a big issue, and that is, even if you can achieve the revenue flow, you have to have traceability from an audit point of view. Because if you don't have an audit, then it's a recipe for fraud on a mega scale.
I mean, look, as a liveness provider, what we do is quite demanding, and we want to get paid. We need to get paid every time somebody asserts their biometric identity. So this is a significant issue for me, because every time someone authenticates themselves using iProov, we need to get paid. So we're a certificate provider, just as probably you are, and just as many of you in this room are. And the question of how we get paid, particularly given that the EU digital identity wallet laws specifically preclude the use, any payment or charge to the relying party for the use of the core PID elements. So the EU digital identity wallet in itself kind of excludes. It kind of says, there's no payment model required here because nobody's allowed to pay for it.
Only for citizen to government, not business to business.
That is unclear, John. Sorry, I'm not sure if you heard that remotely. Citizen to government, not citizen to business.
I guess what I meant there was we don't want to get into a situation where there is only one identity issuer, which is the government. Then that's centralized, right? So there are a lot many other, let's say, identity data available from the private sector.
Yes.
For example, we work with mobile operators, right? So they add a lot of value. The example that you took for the retail or M&S, for example, that could have been solved by identity data, which would solve that, that seems to a problem, right? So we need to probably, and it shouldn't be difficult because we can learn from the crypto world. In the crypto world, it's similar. I didn't want to use the blockchain world for decentralized, right? No. We can learn from the crypto world. There was a similar problem there as well. There are a lot of...
I don't disagree. I mean, what you're saying is 100% correct, that in a model in which either the government wallet or the extended or the derived service provider wallet contains more certificates in it than just the information that the government provided. It contains phone number assertion. It contains certificates of a biometric verification. It contains information about your creditworthiness. These are all things that actually are going to be necessary. We don't know if the government wallet is going to be allowed to contain those or not. We don't know, if not, then presumably there will be derived service provider wallets, but then the question is, this question is always the same. In a completely decentralized world, how does money flow through this? I've been talking about this in MEF conferences now for about 2.5 years, and now people are starting to get sweaty palms about it as the EU digital identity wallet gets closer.
Okay, Andrew. Well, I'm getting the sign from people who are running this show. So
I shall be around for a little while. As I indicated, I've got to leave quite early for a board meeting, but I'll be happy to engage in further discussions at the coffee break.
Thank you so much. As usual, very eloquent. Lovely.